U.S. hit with some lousy unemployment numbers this week. Bad news for the millions of Americans out of work. And if history is any indication, not good news for President Obama either. Take a look at this. In the past 30-plus years, only President Reagan won re-election when the unemployment rate was over 7%. Right now, the unemployment rate, more than 9%, 9.1. So can President Obama buck the trend in 2012? Here now, Alexandra Acker-Lyons, a Democratic strategist and former National Youth Outreach Director for the John Kerry for President campaign, and Justin Sayfie, a GOP strategist who served as spokesman for former Florida Governor Jeb Bush. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.
Hi, Heather. Hi. Justin, I'll begin with you, but I want to ask you both the same thing. Can President Obama buck this trend? Will he be reelected? Can he, if unemployment numbers continue to be so large, if employment remains lousy, basically? Justin?
It's going to be very challenging for him to do that. Yesterday's unemployment report showing the economy only grew 54,000 jobs is proof that President Obama's economic policies have failed the United States. His central promise was that he was going to spend $787 billion federal dollars. That happened over 2 years ago, and here we are with rising unemployment rates. Over 14 million of our fellow Americans are looking for work. Over 8 million Americans have part-time jobs who want to work full-time, and President Obama calls it a bump in the road. It's going to be very difficult for him to win, given the fact that his economic policies have failed.
And Alexander, what about that $787 billion promise?
I mean, let's not forget that this is a deficit and an economic crisis that President Obama inherited. I think, as you referred to in the opening, the Reagan example is the thing to look at here. President Reagan also inherited a terrible economic crisis. Things weren't looking great for the first 3 years of his term. They turned around in time for a re-election. And not only was he re-elected, he was re-elected in a landslide with the highest unemployment that we'd seen in quite some time. So certainly these numbers yesterday were disappointing. It's important to remember President Obama has added 2.1 million jobs to the economy since he took office. The last 15 months has seen growth every month, and 83,000 private sector jobs were added this last month. Local governments are continuing to have to make cuts in their employment numbers, and I think that's what we're seeing kind of come to effect here. Plus, the crisis in Japan and high energy prices have really impacted the trajectory we were on with solid, stable economic growth. Nobody's saying that these numbers weren't disappointing, but like the president said, I do think this is just a slight uptick in the road to recovery.
All right. Well, Alexander, I got to hold you to that, though, just for a moment. We'll stick with this. To compare to President Reagan, the difference being that the numbers were changing dramatically and quickly. That's the difference. And for the unemployment rate to sink below 8% before the next election, 17 months from now, 209,000 jobs would have to be created every single month. That's between now and next November. And even the most optimistic economists, they do not expect it to drop below 7.2% between now and November 2012. So given that reality, Alexandra, what has the president done to create jobs quickly enough? What is he doing?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things you can point to. The first being tax cuts. 17 different tax cuts or incentives for small businesses, which, as we know, are the #1 driver of economic growth in this country. Payroll tax cuts for workers, tax cuts for businesses. So that has all played a huge role here. But I think part of what we're seeing as well is that the country is feeling very unsettled by a lot of these Republican proposals for budget cuts. And they're saying we're not cutting the right things here. We're not being smart about reducing our budget. We're just slashing and burning our way through. So the country is seeing a lot of unease and unrest coming from the Republican side. The GOP House of Representatives and GOP presidential candidates are making President Obama's reelection easier on what should be a fairly hard footing for him, his economic numbers.
And Justin, your response to that?
Well, my response is, fortunately, the American people gave the Republicans control of the House. Had they not done that, President Obama and his allies in Congress were pushing for a massive tax increase that would have hobbled and devastated our wobbly economy. So fortunately, the American people have done that. We need to send more Republicans so they can continue to do those tax cut policies that we just heard about. But at the same time, the American people are not going to forget when they needed their president to be focused like a laser beam on the economy, he was off ramming a health care reform proposal down America's throat that 26 states have now sued and that is very unpopular. And President Obama's unpopularity on the economy is almost now as unpopular as the war in Iraq. So with that unpopularity of his own economic policies, he's going to have a very, very difficult time, and he's going to have a lot of explaining to do come 2012.
And let's talk a little bit more about that since you brought it up. Following the killing of Osama bin Laden, President Obama's approval rating, we all agree with this, it increased, no doubt. But take a look at this Fox News poll. On a list of top issues that voters rank in their level of importance, Iraq, you mentioned Afghanistan and terrorism, all of that near the bottom of priorities for the president and Congress. The number one issue by far, the economy. So, Justin, is this an indication, do you think, that that bump in the president's approval rating will be temporary and insignificant?
Well, yes, I do think so. Look, the number one issue we know is the economy. When you have 25 million Americans who are unemployed or underemployed, that's going to be the top issue. And the fact that President Obama took his eye off the ball in 2010, wasn't focused on the economy, and he used the example of someone who gets hit by a truck, it's going to take some time to recover. Well, President Obama is the physician in that metaphor, and the patient, the American people. He walked out of the room and left the American people without any care, without any proper care. He ignored the economy in 2010. He was focused on getting health care reform approved, and now Americans, 25 million of them, are paying the price for his failure of leadership.
Alexander, you're laughing.
I mean, Justin's rewriting history here. I think it's also just important to point out that the reason why the president focused like a laser beam on health care is because of the rising increase in costs that Americans are paying out of pocket, and the fact that it's becoming one of the most expensive sectors of our economy. But just to go back, I mean, we're 17 months out from a presidential election. As Justin knows, that's a lifetime in American politics. I think people are going to be judging President Obama on the totality of his leadership, on the totality of his performance and his vision. Certainly, his leadership capabilities came into play with capturing and killing Osama bin Laden. No one is questioning his foreign policy credentials, certainly. And President Obama's approval rating not only has ticked up, and of course that's a fake bounce that he got a little bit after killing Osama bin Laden, but he is still above 50% against every possible GOP contender. And over the next year, as these laughable candidates in the GOP start to beat up on each other even more, I think his reelection prospects are just going to become more solidified.
All right, we'll see. Like you said, 17 months out. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Alexandra Acker-Lyons and Justin Sayfie, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heather.